When Clara Whitfield missed her train to help a dying stranger at a dusty Wyoming station in 1879, she thought she was throwing away her only chance at a respectable life as a mail-order bride. Little did she know that the frail old man, clutching his heart, owned gold mines and cattle ranches stretching across half the territory. But would his hidden fortune be enough to save them both when corrupt lawmen come to collect what they believe is rightfully theirs? Steam roared from the black iron beast as Clara Whitfield pressed her sweaty palm against the train ticket that would carry her away from everything she knew. The Wyoming territory stretched endless and golden under the August sun of 1879, while dust devils danced across the prairie like tiny tornadoes. Her stomach twisted with fear and hope as she clutched the worn leather bag that held her only dress nice enough for meeting a husband. The locomotive's whistle screamed so loud it made her ears ring. All around the wooden platform, travelers pushed and shoved to climb aboard the giant machine that would take them west to California. Clara had never been farther than the next town over, but now she was about to travel hundreds of miles to marry a man she'd never met. Her fingers found the cold metal of her father's old pocket watch inside her bag. It was the only thing left from home besides the debts that chased her like hungry wolves. The watch had stopped working years ago, but she kept it anyway because it reminded her of better times when Papa was alive and their little house felt safe. "All aboard for California!" the conductor shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of hissing steam and clanging metal. Clara took a shaky breath and stepped toward the train. Mr. Henry Calloway was waiting for his mail-order bride in Sacramento. She had written him letters full of lies about being educated and refined, when really she'd spent her whole life washing other people's dirty clothes just to buy food. But maybe in California she could pretend to be the lady he expected. The train car steps looked as tall as a mountain. Other passengers climbed up easy as you please, but Clara's legs felt like water. What if Mr. Calloway took one look at her work-rough hands and sent her packing? What if he discovered she could barely read beyond simple words? Just as she grabbed the metal rail to pull herself up, a weak voice called out behind her, "Help! Please, help me!" Clara turned and saw something that made her heart jump. An old man with silver hair and kind gray eyes had fallen against a wooden shipping crate. His face was white as fresh snow, and one shaking hand pressed against his chest, while the other reached toward his walking stick that had rolled away in the dirt. People walked right past him like he wasn't even there. A fancy lady in a purple dress stepped over his legs without looking down. A man in a black suit hurried by, too busy counting money to notice the old fellow gasping for air. The train whistle screamed again, longer this time. The conductor was closing doors. In just minutes, her only chance at a new life would disappear in a cloud of smoke. But those gray eyes looked so scared and alone. Clara dropped her bag and ran to the old man faster than she'd ever moved in her life. Her train ticket fluttered to the ground like a dying butterfly, but she didn't care anymore. The stranger was trying to breathe but couldn't seem to get enough air. "What's wrong? Tell me how to help." She knelt in the dirt beside him, not caring that her only good dress was getting dusty. "My medicine bag," he whispered, pointing with a trembling finger toward a small leather pouch that had spilled open nearby. Little glass bottles had rolled everywhere, mixing with the dust and horse droppings. Heart seizing up something fierce. Clara's hands flew across the dirty platform, gathering the tiny bottles while her mind raced. She'd seen her papa have attacks like this before he died, when his heart would skip beats and make him gasp like a fish out of water. Behind her, the train was starting to move, making awful grinding sounds as the wheels turned. "Which bottle? There are so many." She held up the collection of medicine, trying not to panic as the old man's breathing got worse. "Blue one. Small blue one." His voice was getting weaker. Her fingers sorted through the bottles until she found one filled with blue liquid. The cork was stuck tight, but she twisted it hard until it popped free. The smell was sharp and bitter, like medicine always was. "Here, drink this." She helped him tip the bottle to his lips while supporting his head with her other hand. The train's whistle gave one final, lonely call as it rolled away from the station. Through the corner of her eye, Clara watched her carefully planned future disappear into the distance, leaving nothing but empty tracks and settling dust. Her ticket to California was gone. Her chance to marry Mr. Calloway was gone. Everything was gone. But the old man's color was slowly coming back. His breathing grew easier, and the terrible whiteness left his face. After a few minutes, he was able to sit up straighter against the shipping crate. "Child, your train." He looked at the empty tracks with worry in his gray eyes. "Trains come and go," Clara said, though her heart was beating fast with fear about what would happen to her now. She had no money for another ticket, no place to sleep tonight, and no way to let Mr. Calloway know she wasn't coming. "Are you feeling better now?" "Much better, thanks to you." The old man struggled to his feet, leaning heavy on his walking stick. "Name's Josiah Brennan. I've been wandering these territories for more years than I care to count." Clara helped steady him, noticing how his clothes were patched and worn but clean. "I'm Clara Whitfield." "I was. Well, I guess I was heading somewhere that doesn't matter anymore." Josiah studied her face with those kind eyes. "Everything matters, child. Even the things that don't happen the way we planned." Fire crackled between Clara and the old man as darkness wrapped around their small camp behind the livery stable. Josiah Brennan stirred a dented pot of beans, his weathered hands moving with surprising steadiness despite his earlier heart episode. The smell of wood smoke mixed with the distant sounds of Cheyenne settling into night piano music from the saloon, horses nickering in their stalls, boots on wooden sidewalks. "You saved my life today," Josiah said quietly, ladling beans onto a chipped tin plate. "Most folks would have stepped right over me to catch their train." Clara accepted the warm plate gratefully. Her stomach had been growling for hours, and she hadn't eaten since dawn. "My mama always said helping others comes back to you threefold. Of course, she also said good things come to patient folks, and I've been waiting 23 years for something good to happen." The old man's eyes twinkled in the firelight. "What were you hoping to find in California, child?" "A husband named Henry Calloway. Got his letter 3 months ago. Sent him my photograph. Told him I was educated and refined." Clara poked at her beans with a bent spoon. "Truth is, I can barely read fancy writing, and the only thing refined about me is how good I am at washing rich ladies' dirty laundry." Josiah chuckled, a warm sound that made Clara feel less alone than she had in months. "Seems like you're plenty refined where it matters in your heart. Hearts don't pay for food or shelter, Mr. Brennan. I owe 3 months' rent on a room I can't afford, and now I got no way to get to California and no money for another train ticket." Clara set down her spoon, suddenly losing her appetite. "I'm right back where I started, nowhere to go and no prospects." The old man studied her face in the flickering light. His gray eyes held secrets, deep and still as mountain lakes. "What if I told you there might be another way? Something that doesn't involve pretending to be somebody you're not?" Before Clara could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. 3 riders emerged from the shadows beyond their small fire, their faces hard and unwelcoming. The lead man wore a sheriff's badge that caught the firelight, but something about his cold smile made Clara's skin crawl. Well, the sheriff drawled, dismounting with deliberate slowness. "If it isn't old Josiah, camping like a common vagrant, and with such lovely company." His gaze lingered on Clara in a way that made her wish she could disappear into the darkness. Josiah's entire body had gone rigid beside her. "Evening, Sheriff Drummond. We're not causing any trouble." "Trouble has a way of following you around, doesn't it, Brennan?" The sheriff's 2 companions remained mounted, their hands resting near their gun belts. "Been a long time since you dared show your face in my territory." Clara looked between the 2 men, sensing years of bad blood simmering beneath their polite words. Whatever history existed between Josiah and the sheriff, it felt dangerous as a coiled rattlesnake. "We'll move on come morning," Josiah said carefully. Sheriff Drummond laughed, but the sound held no warmth. "Move on where, exactly? You got no horse? No wagon? No money for supplies? Face facts, old man, your wandering days are over. Time to settle up what you owe." "What does he owe?" Clara found her voice, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The sheriff's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Ask your friend about his mining claims, sweetheart. Ask him about the investors who trusted him with their money, only to watch it disappear like smoke." Dawn painted the Wyoming sky pale gold as Clara walked beside Josiah through Cheyenne's dusty main street. The old man moved with surprising purpose, his wooden cane tapping rhythmically against the packed earth. Store owners were sweeping their porches and hanging out their signs, preparing for another day of business in the growing frontier town. "Tell me the truth, Mr. Brennan," Clara said, as they paused before the impressive brick building that housed the First National Bank. What did Sheriff Drummond mean about mining claims? Josiah's fingers traced the brass nameplate beside the bank's heavy wooden door. For a long moment, he stood silent, and Clara watched a dozen different emotions cross his weathered face: grief, regret, something that might have been hope. 30 years ago, I was the richest man in this part of Wyoming territory, he said finally. Owned gold mines up in the mountains, cattle ranches stretching from here clear to the Montana border. Had more land than any one person had a right to claim. Clara stared at him, her mind racing. The man who'd shared his meager beans with her last night had once been wealthy beyond imagination. What happened to it all? My wife Margaret took sick with consumption. Doctors said there was no hope, but I couldn't accept that. Josiah's voice cracked like old leather. I spent everything trying to save her, brought specialists from back east, sent her to fancy hospitals in Denver and San Francisco. When she died anyway, I had nothing left but empty land and a heart full of guilt. But the land is still yours, isn't it? Clara pressed. Legally speaking, yes. But what good is owning half the territory when you just walk away from it all? I've been wandering ever since, living like a beggar when I could have. He trailed off, shaking his head. Clara felt pieces clicking together in her mind. That's why Sheriff Drummond wants you gone. If you came back to claim what's rightfully yours. A sharp crack split the morning air, and the bank's front window exploded in a shower of glittering glass. Clara threw herself against Josiah, pushing him behind a wooden post as shards rained down around them. Through the settling dust, she saw Sheriff Drummond standing in the middle of the street, his smoking pistol pointed skyward, and a crowd of hard-faced men gathering behind him. "Time's up, Brennan," Drummond shouted, his voice echoing off the surrounding buildings. "You got two choices. Sign those papers transferring your claims to the territorial government, or we'll dig two graves right here in the street." More townspeople appeared in doorways and behind windows, drawn by the commotion but too frightened to intervene. Clara felt Josiah trembling beside her. Whether from fear or rage, she couldn't tell. "He can't do this," she whispered. "This is broad daylight, in front of witnesses." "He's the law in this town," Josiah replied bitterly. "Been buying up abandoned claims for years, selling them to Eastern investors who don't know any better. My return threatens his whole operation." Clara's mind worked furiously. Somewhere in those mountains were gold mines worth a fortune, and Sheriff Drummond was willing to commit murder to steal them. But if Josiah was too frightened to fight for what was his, they'd both end up dead in this dusty street. "What would Margaret want you to do?" she asked suddenly. Josiah's head snapped toward her, his gray eyes widening with surprise and something else, a spark of the man he used to be. "She'd want me to stop running," he said quietly. Clara stood up, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Then let's stop running." She stepped out from behind the post, directly into Sheriff Drummond's line of sight, her hands raised but her chin lifted with determination. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't let this corrupt lawman murder a good man in cold blood. "You want those papers signed so badly, Sheriff," she called out, her voice carrying across the silent street. "Then let's do this proper and legal, with witnesses and everything official-like." Drummond's eyes narrowed, clearly not expecting this young woman to challenge him so boldly. Behind him, his men shifted nervously in their saddles, perhaps realizing that killing an unarmed woman in front of half the town might cause problems even their corrupt sheriff couldn't smooth over. Clara felt Josiah move up beside her, standing straighter than she'd seen since they met. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Thunder rolled across the Wyoming mountains as Clara and Josiah hurried through the muddy streets of Cheyenne. The old man moved faster than she'd ever seen him, his walking stick tapping urgently against the wooden sidewalks. Something had changed in him overnight. The way he held his shoulders, the fire in his gray eyes. "Where exactly are we going, Mr. Brennan?" Clara asked, pulling her shawl tight against the morning chill. Rain began to fall in fat drops, turning the dust to slippery mud beneath their feet. "To face the truth," he said, stopping suddenly in front of the biggest building on Main Street. The First National Bank loomed before them like a fortress, its brick walls dark with rain. 30 years I've been running from what I left behind." Clara stared at the fancy brass nameplate beside the heavy wooden doors. She'd never been inside such an important place. "I don't understand." Josiah's weathered hand traced the wet brick. "Before 1849, before Margaret got sick, I owned more land in this territory than most men could ride across in a week. Gold mines up in the hills, cattle ranches stretching clear to Montana, timber claims that fed half the railroad. The words hit Clara like cold water. You were rich? Richer than I knew what to do with. His voice cracked. Then Margaret started coughing blood. I spent every penny trying to save her. Doctors from back east, medicine from Europe. Nothing worked. Clara felt her heart break for this gentleman. So you lost everything? I thought I did. But the thing is, child, I never sold most of it. Just walked away and let folks think it was all gone. He turned to face her, rain dripping from his gray hair. Sheriff Drummond's been buying up what he thinks are empty claims, selling them to rich men from Boston and New York. A chill ran down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. But if you still own them, then he's stealing from me. And if I prove I'm still alive and still the legal owner, Josiah's eyes hardened. Well, that makes him a thief. The bank door suddenly swung open. A well-dressed man in a fancy suit stepped out, followed by 3 others in expensive coats. Clara recognized one face immediately. Sheriff Drummond, his badge gleaming even in the gray morning light. Well, well, Drummond's voice cut through the rain. Look, what the storm washed up. Clara stepped closer to Josiah, her heart pounding. The other men looked like trouble, the kind who settled arguments with fists instead of words. Gentlemen, Josiah said calmly, though Clara could see his hands shaking. Beautiful morning for a walk. Not so beautiful for old men who should have stayed hidden. Drummond's smile was cold as winter ice. Especially old men who might cause problems for important business deals. The man in the fancy suit stepped forward. Is this him? The one you told us about? This is Josiah Brennan, Drummond said. Or what's left of him. Clara felt anger rise in her chest like floodwater. He's twice the man you are, Sheriff. Quiet, girl. Drummond's hand moved to his gun. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me plenty. Clara surprised herself with how steady her voice sounded. Especially when you're threatening my friend. The fancy suit man laughed. Your friend? This broken-down old fool? This man owns half the territory, Clara said loudly, hoping other people on the street would hear. And you know it. Drummond's face went red. Prove it. Josiah reached into his coat with careful, steady hands. He pulled out a leather folder, old but well kept. I can do exactly that. Inside the bank's marble halls, Clara felt smaller than a field mouse. Rich men in dark suits sat around a polished table that probably cost more than her family's old farm. Josiah sat across from them, his worn clothes looking shabby next to their fancy outfits. These papers are 30 years old, said the man with the gold watch chain. Worthless. Age doesn't make legal documents worthless, Mr. Patterson. Josiah's voice stayed calm, but Clara could see fire in his eyes. Only lies do that. Clara watched from her chair by the wall, trying to understand the big words flying back and forth. Something about mining rights and land grants and territorial law. What she did understand was the fear creeping into Sheriff Drummond's face. Even if these claims are real, Drummond said, wiping sweat from his forehead, you abandon them. That makes them free for anyone to take. Show me that law, Josiah challenged. Patterson shuffled through a stack of papers. Well, that is to say, there is no such law, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a tall woman in a traveling dress, mud on her boots and determination in her dark eyes. She carried a leather bag full of official-looking documents. Who are you? Drummond demanded. Judge Margaret Stone, from the Territorial Court in Laramie. She set her bag on the table with a thud. I rode here as soon as I got word that someone was trying to steal Josiah Brennan's property. Clara's mouth fell open. A real judge. A woman judge. Judge Stone. Josiah stood up slowly, respect clear in his voice. I thought you were still practicing law back east. I was, until I heard my old friend was in trouble. She smiled at Josiah, then turned steel-cold eyes on the men around the table. Gentlemen, I've reviewed these claims. Mr. Brennan owns more land in this territory than anyone except the railroad. He never sold it, never abandoned it, never gave anyone permission to take it. Patterson's face went white. But Sheriff Drummond assured us. Sheriff Drummond lied to you. Judge Stone pulled out document after document. These mining claims alone are worth more gold than most men see in a lifetime. The cattle ranches could feed half of Wyoming. The timber rights could build a dozen towns. Clara felt dizzy. She'd helped the richest man in the territory without knowing it. But looking at Josiah's gentle face, she realized something important. It didn't matter how much he owned. What mattered was the kind of person he was. "This is impossible," Drummond sputtered. "He's just a broken-down old man with no money, no home." "He has something better than money," Clara found herself saying. All the important men turned to look at her. "He has honor." Judge Stone smiled. "Smart girl. Honor is exactly what's been missing from this room." Patterson stood up quickly, grabbing his hat. "If you'll excuse me, I need to return to Denver immediately." "Sit down, Mr. Patterson." Judge Stone's voice could have cut glass. "You bought stolen property. We need to discuss what happens next." Drummond made a move toward the door, but two men in deputy badges appeared to block his way. Clara hadn't seen them come in. "Going somewhere, Sheriff?" Judge Stone asked sweetly. "You can't prove anything," Drummond said, but his voice shook. "I can prove everything." Josiah opened his leather folder wider. "Including the letters you wrote to investors, promising them land you knew wasn't yours to sell." Clara watched Drummond's face crumble as he realized his scheme was falling apart. She felt sorry for him. Almost. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Judge Stone looked at Josiah, then at Clara. "Now we make some very important decisions about justice, forgiveness, and what it really means to be rich." Outside, thunder rolled again. But Clara wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, she and Josiah would face it together. 6 weeks of back-breaking work had turned Clara's soft hands into leather, but she'd never felt stronger. The mountain air filled her lungs as she swung her pickaxe against the rocky creek bed, each strike sending sparks flying in the early September dawn of 1879. "Strike!" Josiah's voice echoed across Devil's Creek like thunder. Clara dropped her tools and rushed to where the old man knelt beside their wooden sluice box. There, nestled among the black sand and pebbles, lay a chunk of gold the size of a chicken egg. The metal caught the morning sunlight and threw it back like captured fire. "Sweet mercy," Clara whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Brennan, this changes everything." But Josiah's weathered face showed worry instead of joy. His gray eyes scanned the tree line above their camp, searching shadows between the pine branches. "Changes things, all right. Question is, for better or worse." Clara followed his gaze and felt ice water replace the blood in her veins. 3 riders sat motionless on the ridge, watching them like buzzards eyeing wounded prey. Even from this distance, she recognized Sheriff Drummond's black hat and the glint of his badge. "How long have they been there?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Since before sunrise." "They know, Clara. Somehow they know we struck it rich." The young woman's mind raced faster than a spooked Mustang. For 6 weeks, they'd worked this claim in secret, living in a small cabin Josiah had built with his own hands decades ago. They'd been careful, quiet, taking only what they needed from the creek while proving the old man's legal rights to the land. Now their careful plans crumbled like sandcastles in a storm. "We could hide the gold," Clara suggested. But even as she spoke, she knew it was hopeless. Drummond had been watching them, waiting for exactly this moment. "Won't matter," Josiah said, his voice heavy with 30 years of regret. "He'll tear this whole mountainside apart looking for it, and he'll use any excuse to put us both in the ground." Clara stared at the golden nugget in her palm, feeling its surprising weight. Just hours ago, she'd thought this discovery would secure their future, prove to the world that helping a stranger at a train station had been worth losing her planned marriage to a California gentleman. Now she realized their real treasure wasn't what they'd pulled from the earth. "Mr. Brennan," she said quietly, "remember what you told me about Margaret, how she always said a person's worth isn't measured in gold." The old man's eyes softened at the mention of his late wife's name. "Every day, child. Then maybe it's time we showed Sheriff Drummond and his gang what we're really made of." As if summoned by her words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. But these horses were coming from below, from the direction of town, and there were far more than 3 riders approaching. Clara and Josiah exchanged glances, both thinking the same desperate thought. Were these reinforcements for Drummond? Or had word of their discovery spread to others who might help them fight for what was rightfully theirs? The thundering grew louder, closer, and Clara gripped the gold nugget tighter, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether they lived to see another sunrise. Dust clouds rose like brown thunder as 20 horses charged up the narrow mountain trail toward Devil's Creek. Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest as she and Josiah stood side by side, facing the approaching riders with nothing but courage and a handful of legal papers. "Whatever happens," Josiah said, his voice steady as bedrock, "I want you to know that meeting you was the greatest treasure of my life." But as the horsemen emerged from the dust, Clara gasped in amazement. Leading the charge wasn't Sheriff Drummond at all. It was Mayor Henderson from Cheyenne, followed by miners, ranchers, and townspeople she'd never seen before. "Josiah Brennan," the mayor called out as he reined in his horse. "About time you came home." Behind Henderson rode an older woman Clara recognized from the day of their confrontation with Drummond. "I told you folks he was telling the truth," the woman declared, sliding down from her saddle with surprising grace. "Martha Coleman, pleased to meet you proper, dear. I knew Josiah's dear wife Margaret before she passed." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes as more riders dismounted, their faces friendly rather than threatening. These weren't Drummond's hired guns. These were neighbors, people who remembered Josiah from before grief had driven him to wander the territories like a lost soul. "Where's the sheriff?" Josiah asked, confusion clear in his voice. Mayor Henderson spat in the dirt, his expression turning dark as storm clouds. "Drummond's in the territorial jail, along with 6 of his men." Turns out the federal marshal had been tracking their land-grabbing scheme for months. "Your young lady here helped break the whole thing wide open." "Me?" Clara's voice squeaked like a rusty hinge. "When you stood up to Drummond in front of half the town, it gave other folks courage to come forward," Martha explained. "Turns out that crooked sheriff had been stealing claims from a dozen families, selling them to Eastern investors who didn't know any better." A bearded miner stepped forward, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Brennan, sir, I worked your claims 20 years back, before you lost your missus. Always hoped you'd come back to set things right." Clara watched Josiah's face transform as understanding dawned. These people hadn't come because of the gold they'd found. They'd come because word had spread about his return, about a decent man reclaiming what was rightfully his. "There's more," Mayor Henderson continued. "The territorial governor wants to meet with you next week. Seems there's talk of making this whole region an official county, and they need someone trustworthy to help organize things proper-like." As the sun climbed higher over the Wyoming peaks, Clara realized that her choice to miss that train 6 weeks ago had changed more lives than just her own. The kindness she'd shown a struggling stranger had rippled outward like stones thrown in still water, touching hearts and changing minds throughout the territory. "What do you say, Clara?" Josiah asked, using the gentle tone that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Ready to help an old man build something lasting?" Clara looked around at the faces surrounding them. Honest, hard-working people who'd traveled miles just to welcome back a friend they'd feared was lost forever. In their eyes, she saw acceptance, respect, and something she'd never expected to find. A place where she truly belonged. "Yes, Papa," she said, the word feeling as natural as breathing. "Let's build something beautiful."